Oh, hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Rising from the Ruins. Today I have Tracy. She's a return guest. A couple of weeks ago, her first episode aired, and it's called Breadcrumbs of Love. That's one of my favorite episodes so far. And so you guys should check it out. She's a love and relationship coach. She's a best-selling author and speaker. Join me today as we welcome Tracy to another episode of Rising from the Ruins.
Hi, Pauline, and thank you so much for having me back. I am so excited and I just love your podcast, and I just love speaking about toxic relationships and how we can show up better for ourselves in order to have the kind of relationships that we want to have.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. And this whole toxic relationships and everything surrounding it is so near and dear to my heart because both of us have been survivors of those kind of relationships. And so that brings us to what we'll be talking about today, and it's on boundaries. I know that listeners would have already heard it from somewhere or read about it from somewhere, but the reason I wanted us to talk about it today is because I heard something towards the end of my relationship that really stuck with me. It says, what we tolerate teaches people exactly how to treat us. And so I I'm a recovering people pleaser. So that means that for a season of my life, I was literally a doormat. I just let people walk all over me and just accepted it. And so I guess we can just hit it off by asking, what are boundaries?
Yes, so you're right. We teach people how to treat us. And I was a people pleaser too. And I was a doormat as well. I was a punching bag. I was whatever you wanted me to be, right? Because I was trying to get love. I was trying to
Mm,
change people to get them to love me. So if I pleased them enough, if I made them happy, they would love me. And that's a recipe for disaster
yeah,
because we can never make someone love us or treat us well. We can't change other people. So boundaries are how we teach other people to treat us.
that's good.
And it's very important to know our boundaries. Like there are boundaries. They're not someone else's boundaries. And that's where it gets a little mixed up because we think we're supposed to tell someone, don't yell at me. And they're supposed to stop yelling at us.
Right.
Right. That's
Mm,
what you would think. In a healthy relationship, you could tell someone, hey, it hurts me when you do X. And that person would be like, oh, wow, like I didn't realize that. I'll try not to do that anymore. That's
right.
healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in a toxic, abusive, or narcissistic relationship, you don't have that interaction, that self-reflection from the other person. You don't have the ability to have a conversation about how you want to be treated. So you can tell a toxic person, hey, it hurts me when you treat me like that. But then they twist it all around and blame you and make you feel wrong and you're too sensitive and
Mm-hmm.
you're being too critical or just making up all kinds of stuff. So it
Yeah.
makes it really hard to set a boundary with someone who's not willing to listen to you. Right. And we
Yeah.
develop our boundaries of how to deal with boundaries in our childhood.
Mm,
So if our parents didn't reset boundaries when we set them, our boundaries aren't respected. So then we don't really know how to set boundaries because don't feel safe. Right. It doesn't, if you tell your mom, don't come in my room, and she comes in your room without knocking, now your boundary's been violated. And so you learn, oh, it's not okay to tell my mom she can't come in my room. Right. And so there's a
yeah.
lot of pieces to that.
Right.
But a boundary is how we stay safe. It's how we get treated how we want to be treated. And so when we don't have boundaries, we are truly teaching people we don't have boundaries and they can
Walk all over.
walk all over us. They can treat us however they want, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or I think one thing that is also common is you see people will set boundaries, and somebody, especially when you're dealing with a toxic, abusive person, they test those boundaries. And then
Yes.
instead of saying, okay, you cannot cross this boundary, we just move the line. And so gradually they get used to knowing
Right.
that they can test it. And then all we do is just move it.
Yes. Right. Right. And that is not setting boundaries.
Hmm.
That's a prime example of you not setting a boundary when you keep moving the goalpost.
Right.
Right. Because when you keep acquiescing to, oh gosh, he's mad at me for this boundary, I can't have this boundary, or he's testing it and really pressuring you on it, and you give in, now it tells him that you don't have boundaries and he can do whatever he wants, or
Mm.
she. But mainly I talk about men
Right.
since I deal
Same
with
here.
women.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what do? How do we have a relationship with a toxic person who, or a person, our parents or our siblings or a friend who's not listening to our boundaries? And the truth is, we really can't. Because if someone doesn't respect us, they're not going to treat us well. So what do we do about that? What we do is we set a boundary, but we enforce it for ourselves. That's the difference. So if someone's screaming and yelling at you and you've said, I don't want to be around you when you're yelling and screaming at me, instead of expecting them to stop yelling and screaming, you remove yourself.
Good.
You become unavailable for the things that are your boundaries. Right. So
Yeah.
that's what we get wrong. We think we're supposed to tell other people, hey, don't treat me like that. And they're supposed to respect it and do it. And then we don't think about it. But the truth is, we have to be the guardians of our boundaries and constantly enforce them. Like, we have to take responsibility for our boundaries that we want, and we
Mm.
have to take action on them instead of expecting other people to take action. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you said something that boundaries are for ourselves, not for others. I guess that's what you're trying to explain here, that
Yes.
it's not enough to tell somebody you cannot do this. But if we stay there and still let them do the things we've told them again and again not to do, then it's like we're expecting them to be responsible for upholding that boundary instead of knowing that it's our responsibility to uphold it.
Yes, it's our responsibility to uphold our boundaries. And so, like during sex, if there's something you don't want to do and you tell your partner that's off limits, but they're trying to talk you into it, like that's sexual coercion, right? Try to talk
Mm.
you into it, guilt you into it, or even physically force it, then they're violating your boundaries.
Yeah.
And so, in in any scenario, you have to remove yourself, because that person is unwilling to respect you and listen to you.
Yeah.
And that's really scary in a relationship, because
Right.
you're afraid to lose their love.
Mm. And
And
I
that's,
think it all boils down to respect, right? Because if I say this is not okay, if somebody actually respects you, they should be able to accept that it's not okay. It doesn't
yes,
matter what it looks like in their own eyes.
right.
It's how I feel. So I guess that brings me to the next point I would ask you. Did you always know about boundaries? Because I probably never heard the word called boundary until maybe the last couple years. I guess as I began to walk through my healing journey and I began to study more and I began to hear the word boundary, and I'm like, what does that even mean? So for you, did you always know about boundaries, and at what point did it become significant that for you to be able to have a healthy relationship with people or have a healthy life generally, that you had to have boundaries in place?
Yeah, I didn't know boundaries by the word, like as a kid.
Mm.
I mean, I knew how it felt to have my rights violated by my parents, right?
Mm.
Not listen to
Yeah.
me, not respect me. And I didn't know that I could stand up for myself against that, because,
Hmm.
when you're a kid, you really can't, kind of, you
Right.
know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But as I grew into an adult, I knew about boundaries, but my version of boundaries was, you have to treat me this way.
Okay.
Right. So it was outwardly projected. And I didn't know how to make someone respect me. I didn't know how to make someone honor my boundaries. And so I didn't truly know what boundaries were. Right. I just knew I wanted people to treat me X way. And so in order to do that, I needed to tell them over and over and over and
Right.
over. Right. Like you're telling
Yeah.
them for the 1400th time, I'm telling you, don't yell at me or call me names. Right. I
Yeah.
never had a clue that I had the power to say, yeah, I'm not going to let him treat me like this anymore. I'm walking away from it,
Yeah.
going to a different room. I'm not engaging in this conversation. So that's kind of what gets you stuck in that defend, explain, justify, and trying to get them to understand mode, right? You're trying to set that boundary of, wait, you're yelling at me. I don't want you to yell at me, or you're giving me the silent treatment, or you're degrading me, or, whatever's going on. Because there's so many pieces of a narcissistic relationship.
Yeah.
And so I never knew what boundaries really meant. I never knew that I was responsible for holding that line. I never knew that it was okay for me to hold that line, because I
I
didn't
love
think
that.
it was.
I love that. Holding the line, like I love that. Because when I look back to my relationship and the silent treatments, like the last one I had was 5 months long.
Wow.
But if I knew about boundaries and from day one, when it started with a day of silent treatment and I would be tired of the tension, I would go make peace regardless of if it's me that is hurt in the process, right? I'll
Right.
still go make peace. And then it went to 3 days and then it went to 1 week. Imagine if I knew how to set boundaries and I'll be like, this is not acceptable. So what that means is that there has to be consequences that comes with him breaking those things. Because I think that's another missing piece. The consequence doesn't necessarily mean it has to be something big. Taking yourself out of the situation is a consequence for somebody violating your boundaries. So
Right.
yeah, so yeah, you were going to say something.
Well, the thing is that when someone's giving you the silent treatment or screaming at you, raging at you, bullying you, blaming you, whatever they're doing, they're out of control of their emotions. Right. And
Yeah.
they're using you as a verbal punching bag,
Yeah.
sometimes a physical punching bag, right? If you're being physically abused.
Yeah.
But the greatest gift you can give them, the consequence is removing yourself from it, so they have to deal with their own emotions.
Right.
Because when we continue to be the punching bag, they don't have to deal with their own emotions. They can't learn to take responsibility because we're taking it.
That's so true.
We don't realize we're taking it, but we're taking that's why someone can rage at you and 2 minutes later they're perfectly fine and in a good mood.
I know. And
Yeah.
then they expect you to also like
Oh,
just turn off like that and just
yes.
accept that they like for them it looks like it's no big deal. Meanwhile, they've done you so much harm already.
Yes.
So yeah, that's like really fantastic. But then I guess now the thoughts coming to my mind is so uh, okay, so we already understood or established from the moment you started that sometimes is growing up, we didn't know we could set boundaries and actually enforce them because that was just how we were raised. And so, what would you think is one of the things that is actually pushing um, us to the point where we're so afraid to set boundaries? Now, we didn't even know about boundaries for a long time, but some people do know, but they're afraid to set it anyways.
Right.
And then maybe at the point we knew, we're also afraid to set it. What do you think are the things responsible?
What's responsible is that we're terrified of losing their love. Like if we set a boundary of, I'm not going to participate in the crazy with you anymore, we're afraid they'll stop loving us. We're afraid they'll leave us. We're afraid they might physically harm us, right? There's a lot of fear underneath of that because we've been conditioned as kids. If we have boundaries, you don't get love. And most of us have developed a codependency where we're looking outside of ourselves for love because we don't know how to resource it within ourselves. And so we bring this into our adult relationships. And so when someone treats us bad, even though we know instinctively, like we don't have to be trained to know in our brain about boundaries. Like we instinctively know this feels bad and this person shouldn't treat me this way and I don't want them to. But we're terrified of speaking up because there are repercussions a lot of times.
Yeah.
Right. Or we've been threatened that there'll be repercussions. Well, if you go against me, I'll take the kids away. I'll take all the money. I'll take the
Or you,
house.
or you'll
You're
be
going to be left with
divorced.
nothing.
Yeah.
Right. I'm going to divorce you.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and our identity is really tied up in this relationship, right? Being a mom, being a wife, girlfriend, whatever status that is, because we're also afraid of being alone a lot of times.
Yeah.
And so, but the underlying piece of it is that we're terrified of losing their love because we don't feel lovable. We don't feel like we're enough. And so we need this person's approval. We're trying to get them to love us like they did in the beginning of the relationship and reinforce that we're enough. And so when they're screaming and yelling at us, we're afraid that now we're not enough, we're not lovable. And so we're trying to get them to stop yelling at us or stop, just like when you go and tried to make peace with the silent treatment, right?
Yeah.
You felt unlovable. You felt like you weren't enough. Those are our two greatest fears. And
Right.
that drives all the stuff around toxic relationships and alcoholism and drug addiction and everything all around it.
Yeah, and you mentioned something about codependency, which I think is also a strong factor, because even though we didn't consciously know it, when we're people pleasing, we're actually codependent. So it means that we're happy when they like us, we're like, and so you find yourself, and that's why in toxic relationship you end up losing yourself because you literally bend over backwards to do everything they want.
Yeah.
I remembered very early on in our marriage, I would be like, I feel like this relationship is all about you, is what you want, when you want it, how you want it, where you want it, my feelings regardless. And I mean, if I had the right knowledge, those are the times I should have been enforcing my boundaries, but I just went with it. If you wanted it this way, I did it that way just to keep peace. And so I think being codependent is also a big thing, fast on the heels of the fear of losing love and ending up alone and all of those things. And just to buttress your point, like I'm looking at the the background behind me and I'm seeing the waves come, right? And it reminds me of this scripture in Job where Job was actually describing the things God does, and he's saying that God actually created boundaries for the seas and the oceans, and he says, thus far can you come? And then we also remember in the creation, when God created Adam and Eve and put them in the garden, he says, you can have this, but this you cannot have. And those are examples of boundaries. And so I guess what both of us are trying to say to the woman who is listening is that it's okay to have boundaries. It's scriptural, it's godly. It's not from a selfish place. Now, I guess that sometimes um one of the things that also makes people afraid of setting boundaries, especially if you've had scriptures thrown at you or had yourself manipulated based off of things that people read off of scripture and read out of context, you come from a place of feeling guilty that maybe you keeping boundaries is selfish. What do you have to say on that?
Yeah, we are trained not only by having inappropriate scripture used against us, but society as a whole. Women are brought up to be the givers.
Right.
So we're supposed to give, and not get anything back. And so we're honestly just kind of taught through society and through our homes, like when there's a boy and a girl, the boy is encouraged to go to sports and the girl is supposed to go into homemaking, right?
Right.
And that stuff's still going on. I mean, it's not as
Yeah.
much as it used to be, but
Mm.
there's still that mentality that women are supposed to be the nurturer, the caregiver. And so that message tells us, that's how we interpret it and kind of how it's reinforced, that if we take care of ourselves, we're selfish,
Mm.
right? If we, there's some scriptures in the Bible about how a woman's supposed to submit to a man. Doesn't mean you don't have needs. It doesn't mean you don't have wants. It doesn't mean you don't stand up for yourself. What that means is he's supposed to be the guider of your relationship through God
Right.
and treat you in a loving, godly way. It doesn't mean you're supposed to just be a walking doormat and submit to everything that he
Yeah.
wants in every way he wants to treat you.
Mm.
So it's not true that we're selfish. It feels selfish because a lot of times we've never learned how to have wants and needs, and that it's safe and okay to have them.
Mm.
And so it's really important to understand that boundaries are not selfish. You're right. God, if you look all around the earth and the universe, there's boundaries everywhere because that's how we're supposed to be. God set that example, having boundaries. God doesn't say in the Bible to stay married, even if you're being abused. God does not like abuse. And
Mm.
so we're allowed to say no to that. We're allowed to say, no, it hurts me when you yell and scream at me, or you call me bad names, or you're bullying me and blaming me, gaslighting me, all the circular conversations. We're allowed to say no to that.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing to remember is that when we're so fixated, because that's what happens, we become focused on the abuser instead of God.
Mm.
Right? We
Right.
stay focused on surviving and trying to keep this person from being angry with us. Now our focus is on this person
Yeah.
instead of God and listening to what God is saying, because what God is saying is, I don't want any of my children treated that way. You don't have to stay in a marriage where you're being abused. That is the truth. God does not like divorce. He didn't say you're punished for divorcing someone who's abusing you. It doesn't say that in the
Right.
Bible. But people like to twist all that stuff around.
Yeah.
But it's not true. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, you're not at all selfish, but we feel selfish because we're supposed
Been
to nurture and
hardwired to feel
give.
that
We're
way.
hardwired to nurture. But
Mm.
there's a balance, right?
Yeah.
There's selfish, egoic selfish, where we're being, everything's about us, kind of like the narc. The narc is kind of selfish,
Right.
right? An abuser is selfish because it's all about them and their needs.
Mm.
But there's a way to be selfish and be nurturing. There's a way
Yeah.
to be selfish and meet other people's needs,
Mm.
right? And if
Yeah.
we aren't selfish, we can't give what we don't have.
Right.
So if we don't give ourselves the love and give ourselves what we need and want and nurture ourselves, we honestly can't nurture people in a healthy way,
Yeah.
right?
And
And
that's
that,
so, yeah, and that's so important that you made that demarcation, because also, if we're not careful, there's a fine line between becoming selfish and actually upholding our boundaries.
right,
Um, and so it's a good thing that you made that demarcation, and also bringing to the forefront of the fact that we cannot pour from an empty cup. So if we do not, first of all, treat ourselves right, then it's difficult for us to be able to treat others. And while we're still on the context of God setting example of boundaries, I mean, let's just take nature, for example. Every time the ocean or the seas break their boundaries, we see the chaos that follows.
right,
When Adam and Eve broke the boundary God gave them, we're living evidence of the troubles we face are evidence of the chaos that follows boundaries being broken. So let's talk a little bit about um the chaos that follows us being in relationships where there are no boundaries, and um whether it's to our mental health or our physical health, or even to the detriment of the relationship itself, because sometimes you might even just be dealing with a selfish person. And maybe if you're able to enforce boundaries enough and the person is willing and open to learn, then they may be able to know that, okay, this is something that is not acceptable and they don't do it anymore. So let's talk about the chaos that follows when we don't have boundaries in place in relationships.
Yeah. So when we don't have boundaries, our life is chaotic, right? Because even if we go to our job, we don't have boundaries at work with our boss. Our boss piles all the work on us. We're overworking and not getting paid for it. And we're
Yeah.
doing other people's jobs, right? In our relationships, it looks like we tend to get smaller and smaller and smaller because our light is dimming.
Mm,
Light inside of us is being shoved down and covered up by all this negativity. And so it's chaotic. We're walking on eggshells. We're trying to keep
yeah.
peace. We're trying to figure out how to keep someone from being angry or give us the silent treatment. Our needs are never met, and it's like we feel like it's never enough. Like no matter what we do, it's never enough for this person because it
Yeah.
truly isn't.
Mm-hmm.
But it's because we're not setting those boundaries, and having no boundaries creates chaos within us, within the relationship,
Yeah.
because boundaries are an act of love.
Mm,
Love is what makes the world go around, right? Love,
yeah.
kindness, acceptance, all of that. When we're not setting boundaries, we're not loving ourselves. We're not loving the other person.
Mm,
Boundaries are an act of love because when we love ourselves enough to say, I am not going to permit you to be abusive with me in any way, shape, or form, we are standing up for ourselves and we are lighting our light. We're igniting it. And
yeah.
so now we can shine better in the world. And we're also, it's an act of love for the abuser because now he has to take responsibility or
Right.
go abuse someone else.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because there are people who never change.
Yeah.
But um our life is chaos. Like, I remember my ex would yell at me because I exercised too much. So then I stopped exercising.
Wow.
You know, I loved exercising, right? But it's like, okay, in order to make him stop yelling at me, I was
Yeah.
quit, right? Then he yelled at me for going to lunch with my grown daughter. So then I quit going to lunches with my daughter, so
Yeah.
it gives them control over your life. So now you're not doing any of the things you enjoy. Like there's no
Exactly.
joy in your life,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
You would go on vacation. He'd yell at me for exercising on vacation for an
Mm,
hour out of our whole day, right?
right.
Or he'd yell at me for, just, I mean, those are the crazy things. Like it
Mm,
wasn't like he's yelling at me because I'm out cheating
right.
or I'm drinking and I'm drunk all the time,
Mm,
right? Like he's yelling at me about the everyday things I enjoy and trying to take them away from me. And
yeah.
so when we don't have that boundary of, well, he can be mad about this and I'm going to
Mm,
exercise anyways. And we just let him be
exactly.
mad, like be
Mm-hmm.
mad. I'm not going to
Yeah.
react. When we stop reacting and stop taking it personal,
Mm,
well, that's his problem. That's not my problem. I love exercising, so I'm going to keep exercising.
mm,
But when we give away our power in that way and we give up the things that are important to us, now we're not enjoying life
mm,
and we've given all of our power away. It's like taking a little teddy bear it's like
mm,
taking your little girl inside of you
mm,
and handing it to your abuser and saying, "Here, love me, take
mm,
care of me."
mm.
Because I'm not going to take care of I'm not taking responsibility for myself.
Yeah.
You have to love me. You prove I'm lovable.
Mm,
And that's the chaos because now we're powerless.
mm,
We haven't been saying, well, you can be mad all day because I wore this pink dress,
mm-hmm.
but I'm going to wear it
Anyways.
anyway.
Yeah.
But it feels scary to do that because we're wanting
Mm,
their love. And that's the
yeah.
whole thing.
Yeah.
Healing our codependency, healing the people pleasing, healing the perfectionism, all
Mm,
the pieces that make us a match to the toxic person.
right.
We can heal those things and start setting boundaries and it's not easy.
Yeah, it's not.
Right.
It's
It's
not.
not easy when you haven't been
We
doing it. It's
Yeah,
terrifying.
it's terrifying, and it's hard because I know that I lost me so much
Yeah.
so that when I look in the mirror, it's like I'm seeing a stranger that I couldn't recognize. And it took me 12 years plus in the marriage to finally come to a point where I realized that if I died trying, because at this point I'm getting all kinds of health problems. I have chronic
Yes.
fatigue, I'm losing my hair, I'm losing my nails, I lost my memory, I lost my hearing, like my whole life is falling apart at this point. And then I finally realized that if I died trying, I could never please him.
Mm-mm.
And that was freeing, coming to the point where you just realize that you've done everything you could, you've lost yourself in the process, and you still haven't been able to please this person. So that
Yes.
was really freeing. And so I guess that brings me to the next point. How do we set these boundaries and keep them?
Well, we practice.
Okay.
I mean, the truth is we don't have that skill.
Right.
We didn't learn that skill.
Mm,
And we're with someone who's not going to help us build that skill. They're going to
yeah.
fight us, right? So first we have to, first I'm going to say it would be important to hire a coach to help support you.
Okay.
Because when we have someone helping us, we have someone we can talk to about, okay, I tried to set this boundary and this happened. What do I do? Right? Because we don't know the answers. We don't know how to
Right.
set boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so the first thing to do is to decide, what are your boundaries? What are
Good.
they?
Good.
When someone cusses at me, I don't want to be around them. When someone threatens me, I don't want to be around them. When somebody bullies me, blames me, I don't want to be around them. Like making that list of what are your boundaries. I don't want, like for me, I didn't want to be with someone who drank. I didn't want to be with someone who did drugs. I didn't want to be with someone, well, I wanted to be with someone who was loyal and faithful. So I knew what I wanted, but I never really wrote it down. And so
Mm,
it was never in my mind to like, I have to enforce these. I just thought people did those things.
yeah.
So the first thing is make a list of what all your boundaries are
Mm,
and see which ones on that list are going to be a deal breaker, as in, I'm not even going to wait around for that person to see if they'll stop doing it.
yeah.
Right. So
Mm-hmm.
physical abuse would be one of them, emotional abuse, psychological abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse. Like those are deal breakers.
Yeah.
Someone who lies, cheats, those are deal breakers. But make this
Mm-hmm.
list of your boundaries, what you want for boundaries. Then start to notice how they're being violated. Because without awareness, we can't know.
Good.
Right? So become aware of, oh, when he yells at me, I'm not setting a boundary. I'm trying to get him to stop yelling at me.
Mm,
Like if he's yelling at me because dinner's not ready and I'm trying to explain to him, well, doctor ran late and I couldn't get home in time to make dinner and I'm just making
mm,
this up. You're standing there trying to explain this to him instead of, oh,
yeah.
make dinner yourself. I'm not going to stand around for you to yell at me. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
really start to notice, oh, he's yelling at me and I'm letting him do that because
Mm,
I'm sticking around to let him yell at me.
yeah.
Right. So then when we notice and we are aware of how we're not showing up for ourselves, now we can be like, okay, how do I show up for myself?
Mm-hmm.
So then we have to decide, what's the action I'm going to take when someone violates your boundaries? So the action is almost always walking away. Because here's the thing, we can be in one of two intentions at a time, each of us.
Yeah.
We could be in an open intention, which is where we're loving and we're willing to learn and we're curious and
Mm,
we want to connect.
yeah.
Or we can be in a closed intention, which is we want to control, protect, and avoid. When one or two people are closed, you can't have a conversation,
Yeah.
right? If one is open and one is closed, you can't have a conversation. If both are open, now we both can have, that's a healthy relationship, right? We
Right.
both can converse about the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So when someone's yelling and screaming at you, they're not in an open intent. They're in a closed intention. So our first thing is, oh, he's closed. I can't talk to him about this because it's just going to get me more abused.
Mm-hmm.
What can I do? Well, you can't just say nothing because then they'll yell at you for saying nothing, right? Like,
Yeah.
can't win.
Yeah,
So you
no
walk
way.
away. You say, excuse me. My thing used to be, excuse me, I have to go to the bathroom, even if I didn't have to go. Or I'd be like, excuse me, I gotta go run an errand. And I go get in the car and drive around the block or drive around the subdivision. Or I just walk away and go to another room and lock the door.
Mm.
And yes, they'll follow you. Yes, they'll be more angry. Yes, it's scary as all get out to do it. But we have to decide what is that action we're going to take
Mm-hmm.
that is loving to us. Because it's not loving to try to change them and get them to hear us and respect
Yeah.
us. Because they're not going to.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to accept this person is not going to stop treating me that way when he's like that.
Yeah.
So what are my choices? My choices are to make myself unavailable for it. And so it's almost always walking away. And the thing is, we want to explain to them, well, I'm leaving because you're yelling at me. No, you just walk away. They know why you're leaving.
Yeah.
They don't need you. You telling them is giving them a part of control,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're doing that, you're kind of asking permission. You don't
Right.
need their permission. You're a grown person. You get to decide what's good and bad for you. You don't need anyone else to decide for you. You have that power. So just walk away.
Yeah.
And the first few times I did it was terrifying because I was afraid he'd stop loving me, which was crazy because first
Yeah.
off, we don't actually love you, but we
Exactly.
do.
Exactly. So it's interesting how we fear the reality. Like
Yes,
if he's loving, we won't even be at that point, right?
exactly. That's the whole thing. If he actually truly loved you, he would not be treating you that way.
That way.
That's the truth.
Yeah.
Because when we love people, we treat them well,
Yeah.
right? So the other person, if they actually love you, they're going to treat you well. Like it's hard for us to accept these things sometimes because we want to
Yeah.
change someone. And they were nice in the beginning because they always are nice in the beginning, right? You're not going to
Right.
fall in love with someone that's abusing you.
Exactly.
And so once you identify what your boundaries are
Mm-hmm.
and notice how you're not showing up for yourself, where you need boundaries, because you might make that list after you start noticing more things too.
Yeah.
And after you decide what you're going to do, now you have to practice it. And what I used to do is I would go stand in front of a mirror, fully in front
Mm-hmm.
if you can, but just in front of a mirror, and imagine the last time he was screaming and yelling at you or giving you the silent treatment. Just imagine standing in front of him, and then you turn and walk away. Because we're going to practice. We're going to get that in our muscle memory so that because what happens is you can have all the intentions of the world of, okay, the next time he yells at me, I'm walking away. But we get triggered back into our old behavior,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's
Yeah.
familiar and
Mm-hmm.
it's safe. And so we kind of go into a freeze, fight, or flight place.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's freeze or fight or a mix of the two because we can't actually leave. So if we start practicing it, now it's in our resources for us.
Yeah.
Right. And, for me, sometimes I would walk away and other times I couldn't. I would get triggered back in. So having compassion for yourself, because you're not going to just go from
Yeah.
never having boundaries to setting amazing boundaries all the time. You're going to flutter along the way.
Yeah.
You're going to set them one time, the next time you won't. The next 3 times you might not, and then you might. So giving yourself grace, like you're learning a new habit,
Right.
right? It's like going to the gym and you start lifting weights. You can't start lifting the 50-pound weights. You got to start with the 5s or the 10, right? You're building up. It's the same kind of thing. We're learning a new habit. We're learning to advocate for ourselves for a change. And this is not selfish. Boundaries are not selfish.
Yeah.
They make your life so much better and they help you discern who's for you and who's against you.
Exactly.
So it's
Mm.
really important. And so those are the ways to start setting those boundaries.
And that's really important. I love the fact that you said the way to practice is to actually get in the mirror. Because I know that when I started on my healing journey, I had to do a lot of mirror exercise. I
Yes,
learned it from somebody else. It's on YouTube, Lisa Nichols. So she talked about the mirror exercise where you actually get in the mirror. It's three
yep,
steps. First step, you call yourself by name and you say, I forgive you for. And then you pick 7 things
right,
forgive yourself for. And then the next step is you call yourself by name and say, I'm proud at you for. And then you pick 7 things. And then the last step is call yourself by name and then you tell yourself I commit to you for and then you pick 7 things. And I
right.
knew that that really helped me, that by the time I was finishing my therapy, my counselor was like, I was a dream client for her. And so that's really important because the things people have said to us over time builds a different muscle memory that we
Right,
have to undo. And
right.
so you also mentioned the fact that when we love people, we treat them well. And so I guess the easiest way to look at it is I look at my friends and my relationships, people I love, how do I treat them? I need to
Yes,
start treating myself that way. So that
yes,
means that I no longer accept what somebody does to me. I no longer just sit down and just accept it for the sake of peace. For me, it was always for the sake of peace, right? And then we now are able to start practicing that. Okay, if it's not this way, we need to start walking away. I guess at this point, there's something that just kept coming into my mind. I did an episode on when faith gets weaponized. So we have people throw scriptures at us. And so somebody might be listening and they've had somebody told them something like, but Jesus said if somebody slaps you on one cheek, you need to turn the other cheek, right? Or maybe use scriptures like, or how many times do we forgive? 70 times, 7 times, or whatever. Um, what do you do when people don't respect your boundaries? Do you give them 70 times, 7 times? Kind of of forgiveness and letting them, because one of the things I experience is when I say, okay, I'm not okay the way you talk to me, he would cry and apologize, and I would just take it at face value and just be accepting and all that. And over time I began to find out that it was a cycle. He apologizes for this and he does the exact same thing just in a different way.
yes.
And so somebody might be saying, okay, but he said he's sorry, but he did this. How many times do we give people grace before we know that this is a no, I need to take myself out of there? And it's not a matter of turning the other cheek. It's not a matter of not being forgiven. Because one of the things I was accused for when I began to speak up for myself was that I had unforgiving spirit. And I believed it. I believed it. I even answered altar call for it.
I
So
know
what
you
would you
mentioned
say? Yeah.
that.
So what
Yeah.
would you say to this woman who has had scriptures thrown at her to the point that now she's wrestling with, how do I keep these boundaries and still honor God in the process?
Well, first, it's important to understand that the scripture does not say forgive someone 7 times, 7 times, 7 times 7, and keep giving them chances. It doesn't say that. It says
Right.
to forgive them over and over. And that might look more like setting that boundary of, I'm not going to let you abuse me, and I forgive you for it. And you walk away from the relationship. But as your spirit tries to make you wrong, you continue to forgive him.
Mm,
But it doesn't mean you forgive him. It doesn't mean you keep letting him abuse you. That's not what that scripture means at all.
yeah.
It doesn't, it means that you keep forgiving someone who's genuinely trying to change.
Mm-hmm.
If they keep doing the same thing over and over, even in different ways, they're not genuinely trying to change.
Good.
Because someone who's genuinely trying to change is going to come to you and say, oh, I'm sorry, I messed up.
Mm-hmm.
I've been trying to work on this and I haven't been able to quite get the hang of it. Will you give me more time? That's someone who's really wanting to change. An abuser will cry and pretend like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I did it again. I didn't mean to throw the vase. I'm just so lonely. No one loves me.
Manipulation.
Manipulation. So there's a difference. It
Mm,
doesn't mean turning our cheek doesn't mean we continue to let someone abuse us. There's a
mm,
difference.
yeah.
And we have to learn to discern that. When I tell someone that they're hurting me, do they have empathy? Are they able to self-reflect? Right? Because
Mm,
I can remember my husband would be screaming and yelling at me. And afterwards, I'd be upset and I wouldn't want to necessarily talk to him. I'd be like, I just want some peace and quiet because you just screamed
right.
at me for like half an hour
Mm-hmm.
or longer. And then he'd be like, oh, so you're not going to forgive me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so you're going to hold this against me? And I'm
I
like,
had
but
I had lots of those too.
yes. And so I'd be like, well, you just did XYZ. You're angry. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm just frustrated.
Mm,
And you know what? It's just not really a big deal. They have no ability to self-reflect, so they can't fix the problem,
yeah.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's a difference between forgiving a healthy person who's attempting to have a healthy relationship with you. But if you're in a relationship with someone who's toxic, God does not want you to forgive them and stay in the relationship. He wants you to forgive them and get away from them.
Good.
He wants all of his children to be loved and treated with kindness.
Good. That was what I wanted you to highlight and bring it out there because I know that one of the things that got me feeling so much guilt. I mean, even though I wasn't the one who divorced myself, he divorced me, but I felt so much guilt and shame for the longest time because people were taking scriptures out of context. I mean, even though I understand these scriptures, it still felt bad to be judged and treated the way I was treated with people using scriptures. And so I wanted us to highlight that because I know that especially if you're trying to get help in the church setting, which is really sad, when you meet a lot of people, what they just do is manipulate you with scriptures and keep you
Yes.
bound.
Mhm.
And lots of people have lost their lives, and when they should have walked away from the relationship that's killing them. And I'm glad you also mentioned the fact that forgiving and dealing with somebody who is healthy it looks completely different
Yeah.
compared to if you're dealing with somebody um who is abusive. One of the things I noticed was the cycle. Okay, so
Yes.
there's problem today, and then you make peace today, and then he begs and cries and says he's okay, and then it's almost like clockwork. You're back to the same point again and again. And you also mentioned something that is really important. I tell my kids all the time, anybody who does not have the ability to self-reflect cannot change.
No, that's right.
And so you are going to be there to cry and scream that they're not treating you, they're not listening to you, they're not whatever, unless the person actually sits down. That's why I belong to this single Christian group. And so somebody comes and says something like, oh, he's doing something like this and I don't like it. I always ask them, is this something you can change? I said, don't waste your time trying to change people. Can you adapt to it? Because if you try to change people, you'll be frustrated. People change what they want to change.
Yeah.
Then the other thing is, can I live with it if they don't change? If I
Right.
cannot live with it, if my answer to both of them is no, then the next step is just to walk away. I don't
Yeah.
care how long you have spent in that relationship. I don't care what sacrifices you have made. You have to cut your losses and walk away. For me was also realizing that I had spent my youth loving this person. And then I'm thinking of my kids and thinking of what people will say, and I'm trying to make it work at all costs, and it was
Right.
killing. But now I've known that so for me, one of my deal breakers is poor communication because I dealt with a lot of silent treatment. And so now if you are upset about something, if you feel something about something and you do not communicate, for me, it's a deal breaker. I'm
Yeah.
just going to walk and be done with it because I don't want to have this kind of relationship where somebody feels like they have to punish me for something, and so they won't say what they feel, they won't, like it's just crazy. So self-reflection is a very, very big thing for me. And so in the midst of all of these conversations we've been having, is there anything that is just coming to mind that you need to share with this woman who is listening to this episode and feeling like, oh my gosh, this is me every step of the way?
Well, the first thing I want to reflect back on is how you talked about how people use the scriptures to come against you. And remember, there is a scripture that says, any of you who are free of sin can cast the first stone.
Yeah.
So keep that in context. When someone's coming at you and giving you all this stuff and trying to use it against you, is it the truth?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they just manipulating it? Are they free of sin and they're able to judge you and tell you you're not living your life right? They're
Mm-hmm.
not. So you
Yeah.
don't have to listen to any of it because none of it's true. Look to God. Stop focusing on the abuser. Look to God. When we look to God, he illuminates our way. He tells us, no, I don't want you to be being abused every day.
Yeah.
And so many of us stay and stay and stay, and we can talk about this on another episode, but
Mm-hmm.
you're right. The whole thing of he treats me good and he treats me bad, so I'm going to try to change him, instead of being able to accept that he is good and bad, and can I live with the bad side? Is this how I want? I just had a client, I had her make a list of all the good attributes and all the not so good attributes. And she read the good ones and she read the bad ones. And I'm like, okay, do you want to live with these every day? Because that's your only choice.
Yeah.
You can't make him change. So can you live with these? If you can live with these, then stay with them. So we need to be honest with ourselves about the situation that we're in, and stop using scriptures to make excuses to stay, or listen to other people trying to use scriptures, or listen to the abuser trying to use scriptures. There's nowhere in the Bible that God says that he wants any of his children to abuse another child of his, or that it's okay to be abused.
Yeah.
Nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. And so we can't change another person. It's hard enough to change ourselves when we want to change, right? It's hard enough to get ourselves out of a toxic relationship because of the toxic love addiction, right? Do you think you're going to be able to get another person to change? Like,
no, that's
let's
hard.
face the truth. Let's accept what's really going on.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage any woman who's being abused and not setting boundaries and doesn't know what the boundaries are to do those. If you're in a physically abusive relationship, leave immediately. Go to a shelter, find a friend, lock him out, go to court and get a separation or divorce agreement. Get yourself away from this person, because that person will never, ever, ever in 1,010 years change.
Yeah.
If you're being emotionally, verbally, psychologically, financially, sexually abused, or any other way, make a plan to get out, or get out right away. Like, that person is never, ever going to change either, but you're not in physical danger at the moment, but you could be, because,
it escalates.
It escalates, right? My ex used to yell at me once in a while, and then he'd yell at me more often, became like every day, several times a day. And then he started throwing things and grabbing me. So it escalates.
Yeah.
And make that list of deal breakers. You're so right. Like physical abuse, that's a deal breaker. Bullying me, blaming me, not taking responsibility, deal breaker. If I can't have a conversation with you about a problem without it escalating, and we can't talk about it in a loving way on both sides, deal breaker.
Yeah.
We don't have to settle for someone. See, we don't have to settle for someone who doesn't treat us in a loving way, because as a woman set that boundary, the men have to change, because there won't be anyone left
Exactly.
in a relationship with, if we're no
Yeah.
longer willing to tolerate abusive people.
Exactly.
They have to stop being abusive, right?
Exactly.
That's my theory. I don't know if it'll really work, but
I think it will. I
I
think it
think,
will.
yeah.
I think it will, because like I was still legally married when he married somebody else, because there
Oh,
was
wow.
just somebody waiting
Yep.
to see this already made husband and
Yep.
jump in.
Yep.
And anyway, I didn't feel, I felt bad that I was discarded that easily, but I didn't feel bad because I knew what I had tolerated for
Yeah.
those years. And I
Yes.
knew she wasn't going to get a better version. When you deal with toxic, abusive people, the older they get, the worse they get. And so
Yes.
I wasn't feeling bad about it. But almost always, because they're already grooming somebody on the side, there's always somebody who is willing to just step in
Yeah.
as soon as you step away. And so I feel very strongly that, I guess that's one thing for us who have young kids growing up, especially our girls. That's one thing we need. I mean, let me just say both ways. We need to teach the boys to treat women right, and we need
Yes.
to treat the girls to walk away from whatever
Yes.
relationship that doesn't serve them. So as we raise healthy children, they get to the point where all of them are able to say, okay, this is what I won't tolerate. And if you
Yes.
do this one more time, I'm out of here. And they
Yes.
actually stick to it. Like,
Yeah.
like for me, I didn't even say anything about walking away for the longest of time. I remembered when I began to see that the silent treatment had escalated to like 1 week. That was the first time I said, okay, I think you do not want me anymore, and I'm going to have to go. But then, of course, when I think when he initially panicked and saw that I was serious about it,
Yeah.
of course, he did the usual, begged and all that, and then I let it go. And
Yeah.
so, when we also set boundaries and we don't enforce it, then they know that, oh, okay, you said you were going to leave and you didn't leave, so they do it
Yes.
again.
Yes.
Yeah, so I feel I'm all in on that, your theory that when we begin to set boundaries and enforce them and not move the goalpost, then men will either fall in line or they know that there will be nobody there to love them. And I
Right.
think that's where we need to start empowering more women to be able to say, thus far can you come, but no further. Right. Okay, so that brings me to, you told me about a quiz you were creating, and I want to hear all about it. And I'm
Yes.
sure my our listeners will want to hear all about it too.
Awesome. Yeah, so I'm creating a quiz. It's almost ready. It's called Am I Crazy or Is He a Jerk? And it's breaking free from your doubts and reclaiming your sanity.
Mm,
So it's a quiz about you, because almost all the quizzes are, is he a narcissist? Is he this,
yeah.
that? I My coaching and how I attack everything is about, how do you feel? What are you
Mm,
experiencing? Let's bring
yeah.
it back to you, because we've been so focused outside, we don't even always know how we feel. So
Yeah.
I feel like it's so important to say, okay, let's see what things are going on that maybe you're not even paying attention to. Maybe
Yeah.
it's happening, but you're dismissing it,
Hmm.
right? So it's about 15 questions. It's really simple. You just click on the answers real quick. And then you get a result at the end telling you, are you crazy or not?
Mm,
Or is he really a jerk? Of course, I
yeah.
don't say that in my answers because we don't call people names,
Right.
but he's acting like a jerk, right?
Hmm.
So, and you want to see, even if you get a low score on this, there's something I can only address so many things in 15 questions, right? Like
Right.
I can't
Hmm.
cover everything you're experiencing.
Yeah.
So if you're coming to this podcast, if you're coming to the quiz, there's a reason you're being called to it. Something's off
Exactly.
in your relationship. Otherwise,
Hmm.
you wouldn't be searching for answers.
Yeah.
And so no matter how low the quiz is, it's still important and I always invite everyone to a free session with me. And
Mm,
so it's always important to get on that session and let's explore what's going on. What are the red flags? How
yeah.
do you feel? So that we can see, is your relationship toxic or is it
Mm,
salvageable? And
yeah.
so many of us we're not sure what's going on because our life feels crazy, chaotic. That's kind of why I named it. Am I crazy or is he a jerk? Because it's like, am I the crazy one?
Hmm.
Like, because we feel crazy
Yeah.
so much of the time. So yes, I invite everyone to go to www.crazyorajurk.com I'll give you the
I'll
link.
get the link
It
from you.
might be crazy or jerk.com. I'm not sure which.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
guess
I'll
I
put
should
it
have had that with
in the
me.
show notes. No, that's fine. We can always add that to the show notes. And
Yeah.
oh, that's really fantastic because I wish I had access to that kind of quiz when I was at the point where I'm like, because even when I began to find out about what toxic relationships and abuse was, I was still living in denial because I'm thinking, I guess I'm looking at it from the perspective of I'm imperfect, but I know that I know how not to treat somebody as a child of God. And so I couldn't reconcile putting Christian and abuse in the same sentence. So
Yeah.
it would be fantastic to have people actually go through that kind of quiz and actually come to terms with the reality.
Yeah.
Because that's usually I feel very strongly that that's usually the first step to be able to step out of what is killing you and move on. So yeah, that would be a fantastic resource to have on the show notes. And based off of that, I guess we've been going on for probably like 45 minutes now. And it
Like
feels
an
like we
hour.
just, right. And it feels like we just started, like I could just talk with you all day. And I am looking forward to doing more episodes with you. But before we wrap it all up, what are your final words?
It's okay to put yourself first and be a little selfish and to say no to things that hurt you
Mm,
and to set a standard of what kind of relationship do you want to be in and what kind of partner do you really want.
mm. Yeah,
So
that's
it's
so
just,
good.
yeah. And, giving ourselves permission that our light can shine, that we don't
Mm,
have to walk on eggshells,
yeah.
do with Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, be on a roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah.
And it does, it affects us physically, emotionally,
Yeah, it
and
does.
mentally. And so
Yeah.
it's so important that we can't be a vessel for God when we're clouded with all of that toxicity in our body because
Yeah.
it's showing up.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's so important to just be a little selfish and pick
Mm,
you so
yeah.
that you can be in a loving, healthy relationship with yourself and someone else.
Mm. And I'm going to also end with something you said about giving yourself lots of grace.
Yes.
Because for me, when everything unraveled, I'm a perfectionist, and now I realize it was all from whatever childhood experience I had, and I would push myself and drive myself into the ground, trying to do everything, be everything for everybody. But we need to give ourselves grace. In the early days when I came out, sometimes it's the only thing I had the energy to do was to drag myself out of bed, like literally crawl out of bed.
Yeah.
It's okay to give yourself grace that when you do not feel like doing anything, don't do anything. But
Yes.
also give yourself grace that as you set boundaries, sometimes you will fall from it. But always have a reset button for yourself and then come back to it and just keep doing it. Um, I enjoyed this episode again. Like I'm a fiction author. I have some books that I would write and I just love them. Like I would read them over and over again. That's how the episodes I've been having with you feels like. And so I'm blessed that you came on this show today, that you made out time in your busy schedule. And I'm just hoping that the work you are doing for God, because this is us liberating other women, because the church has been silent for so long. And so a lot of women like myself have experienced church hurt because of the life that happened to us that we didn't choose for ourselves. And so I believe strongly that you're standing in God's place for these women you are supporting through the journey. And I'm just praying that God's blessing will be on what you do, and you will continue to flourish and get better and better. Like we had things we were going to say that we already talked about, but I threw a lot of things at you today, and you just pulled through all of them like with so much light. And I'm just going to say I'm thankful to have met you, and I'm thankful to have these episodes with you.
Well, thank you. That just warms my heart because yes, I'm on a mission to eradicate abuse in relationships, one woman
Mm,
at a time.
yeah.
That is very near and dear to my heart because, as you know, I've been through 3 abusive relationships with
Mm,
narcissists, and
yeah.
I finally broke free, and so I want to help other women break free from all these cycles and all the ways we live that don't shine our light.
Mm,
Right. And
yeah.
yes, it's been amazing and magical to be on this with you. I feel like I could talk forever too. Like we
Yeah.
really are very connected and it just flows so naturally with you when we're
Mm,
on a podcast. So I just want to thank you so much. And I am grateful for meeting you as well. I feel like it was destined. And I so appreciate it. And I appreciate all of your listeners. And I'm
mm,
just so excited that hopefully I'll get to be on another one and
yeah.
share some more. There's so much to go over about
I
toxic
know.
relationships. It's
I
like
know.
a never ending subject.
I know.
But my goal is just to really be transparent and bring awareness so that people can understand what's going on with them and know
Mm,
they can too break the cycle.
yeah.
I'm not special. I'm
Mm-hmm.
just like everyone else. I just
Yeah.
committed to it. And so if you just commit to breaking the cycle, get some support, you can reach out to me or anyone really who deals with toxic relationships, but I'd love to help you.
Yeah.
And you can go to www.talkwithtracymay.com, and that's a free session. So you can jump on there and we can talk about what's going on. And I help with one-on-one coaching and group coaching. So just, there's something for everyone. And of
Yeah.
course, I have a bunch of free resources on my website, which I'm sure you'll probably put down. So just reach out for help. That's what I'm telling you. Reach
Yeah.
out for help. There's people here who care and are dedicated, like both of us, who really
Mm,
want to make a difference for you.
yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. Was saying, do not go this journey alone. You don't have to do it alone. And I hope we catch you in another episode. Bye for
Mhm.
now.